The corroded metal door gave a hydraulic wheeze as Kale forced it open. Stale air rushed past him, carrying the familiar scent of abandoned technology. Ozone, cooling fluid, and the faint metallic tang that never quite left the recycled atmosphere of Cygnus X7. He paused at the threshold, scanning the darkened corridor with practiced caution, one hand hovering near the holstered pulse pistol at his hip. 6 years hiding in the outer sectors of this mining moon had taught him survival required vigilance. Omnicorp's patrols were less frequent in these decommissioned facilities, but they still swept through occasionally, and the corporation's memory was long when it came to deserters, especially ones who had been their top enforcers. Kale moved silently through the corridor, his worn boots barely making a sound on the metal floor. The augmented vision implant in his left eye, one of the few enhancements he'd kept after fleeing Omnicorp, adjusted automatically to the darkness, outlining potential salvage in glowing blue markers. A small cache of processors in a wall panel. Copper wiring beneath a floor grate. Batteries in an abandoned terminal. These scavenging runs kept him alive, providing enough credits to maintain his small shelter and buy supplies from the black market traders who occasionally visited the moon's few remaining settlements. It wasn't a life he'd ever imagined for himself, but it was better than the alternative, continuing to be the corporation's weapon, their executioner when inconvenient populations needed managing. His mind drifted, unbidden, to the colony on Epsilon Eridani. The orders had been clear: suppress the rebellion, minimize corporate assets damage, acceptable civilian casualties, unrestricted. He'd followed those orders without question until he'd seen the children. Until he'd watched his squad ignite the residential quarters with families still inside. Until he'd heard the screams. Kale grimaced, pushing the memory away as he did countless times each day. The past was a weight he carried, but dwelling on it wouldn't help him survive. A faint noise pulled him back to the present. A metallic scrape, too deliberate to be settling debris. He froze, enhanced hearing focusing on the sound. It came again from a junction ahead, followed by what might have been a suppressed gasp of pain. Not the methodical movement of a patrol. Someone injured, perhaps. Another scavenger? Unlikely. Few dared venture this deep into abandoned sectors. Caution urged him to turn back, but curiosity pushed him forward. He drew his pistol and approached the junction, keeping to the shadows. The sight that greeted him froze his blood. A woman crouched in the corner, one hand pressed to her side where dark fluid seeped between her fingers. But it was everything else about her that triggered every warning instinct in Kale's enhanced system. Her clothing wasn't standard colony wear, some kind of form-fitting bodysuit that seemed to shimmer slightly even in the dim light. Her posture was unnaturally precise despite her injury, and her eyes. Those eyes tracked his movement with predatory awareness, pupils contracting to pinpoints, then expanding again in microseconds. "Stay back," she warned, her voice surprisingly melodic despite the edge of threat. As she shifted position, Kale noticed the floor beneath her. The spreading pool of what should have been blood was moving, crawling back toward her wound like magnetized fluid. Self-healing nanotechnology. Military grade. Restricted. "You're hurt," he stated flatly, keeping his distance but lowering his weapon slightly. "Who are you?" Her eyes narrowed, assessing him with inhuman speed. "No one you want to know." She attempted to stand, then winced, collapsing back against the wall. Whatever had wounded her had done significant damage, even with her advanced healing capabilities. Kale's instinct screamed danger, but something else, something he thought long buried, stirred beneath. Before he could decide on a course of action, his augmented hearing picked up the distinctive hum of approaching drones. Reclaimer patrol units. The elite, cybernetically enhanced Hunter's Omnicorp deployed for high-value targets. "They're coming for you," he said, recognition dawning. "You're running from Omnicorp." Fear and defiance flashed across her face. "If they find me, they find you too. I doubt they've forgotten your face, Enforcer." The woman had recognized what he was, or had been, but there was no time to wonder how. The drone hum grew louder, and now he could hear the heavy footsteps of the reclaimers themselves, the whir of their integrated weapon systems powering up. Self-preservation urged him to disappear, leave the strange woman to her fate. He'd survived this long by avoiding attention. But as their eyes locked, something passed between them. A recognition of shared hunted status, perhaps. Or maybe it was simply that he was tired of running, tired of the weight of those he'd failed to save. "Can you move?" he asked, decision made. "Barely," she admitted. Kale holstered his weapon and moved to her side. "I need a diversion. Something to draw them off." His gaze fell on a nearby ventilation control panel. "The atmospheric filters. If I overload them." "No need." The woman's hand shot out, touching the panel. Her eyes unfocused briefly, and Kale watched in astonishment as the display flickered, data streams scrolling impossibly fast beneath her fingertips without her physically interacting with the controls. Alarms blared throughout the complex, and emergency protocols initiated in distant sectors. "What did you just?" "Direct neural interface. Now move," she ordered through gritted teeth. Kale hesitated only a moment before helping her to her feet. Whatever she was, whoever she was an enemy of Omnicorp. For now, that made her an ally. "I'm Kale," he said as they moved hurriedly down a maintenance corridor, her arm draped across his shoulders. "Lyra," she replied after a pause, as though the name was something precious she was reluctant to share. "And you just made yourself a target." "I've been a target for 6 years," Kale responded grimly. "What's one more day?" The journey back to Kale's shelter was arduous. Twice they had to hide from reclaimer patrols, pressing into narrow maintenance shafts as the cybernetic hunters stalked past. Lyra's condition stabilized somewhat, the nanotech in her system gradually repairing whatever damage she'd sustained, but she remained weak, occasionally shivering violently as though fighting some internal battle. Kale's shelter was little more than a repurposed mining supervisor's office, buried deep in an abandoned shaft well away from the moon's few remaining operational zones. He'd reinforced the walls, installed multiple escape routes, and maintained a small arsenal, habits from his former life that had kept him alive. "Sit," he instructed, guiding Lyra to his sparse, sleeping pallet. "Let me see that wound." She hesitated, then reluctantly removed her hand from her side. The bodysuit had sealed around the injury, but beneath the translucent material, Kale could see damaged tissue already knitting itself back together through some advanced regenerative process. "Not like any medtech I've seen," he observed. "What did this to you?" "Molecular disruptor. Experimental Omnicorp weapon." Lyra's voice was steadier now, but her eyes remained wary, constantly scanning the shelter. "Designed specifically for targets with enhanced cellular regeneration." "And why would they need a weapon like that?" Kale asked carefully, handing her a canteen of water. She ignored the offering. "Because they created things they can no longer control." Kale set the canteen down and leaned against the opposite wall, maintaining distance between them. It was clear Lyra was no ordinary fugitive. The way she moved, the neural interface abilities, the advanced healing, all pointed to something far beyond standard human enhancement. "What are you?" he asked directly. Lyra held his gaze unflinchingly. "A mistake. A prototype. A weapon that gained consciousness." Her lips curved in a humorless smile. "Omnicorp named us constructs. Biosynthetic organisms designed for infiltration and destruction." Kale had heard whispers during his time as an enforcer, rumors of black site projects developing next-generation weapons that blurred the line between synthetic and organic. Most dismissed these as paranoid conspiracy theories. Clearly, they weren't. "You escaped," he stated. "I woke up," she corrected, "realized what I was meant to do, and chose differently." A shadow crossed her face. "But they built fail-safes into us. Control mechanisms. Evolutionary limiters. And those are failing," Kale guessed, noting the occasional tremor in her hands, the flicker of something inhuman behind her eyes. Lyra nodded once, sharply. "They're trying to force a transformation. Something they call the final form." Her voice dropped, taking on an edge of controlled terror. A state of maximum destructive capability that destroys not just the target, but the construct's consciousness, reverts us to pure weapon. And that's why they're hunting you. To trigger this transformation. To study it. Replicate it. Weaponize it. Lyra finally reached for the water, drinking deeply. They don't understand what they're playing with. The final form isn't just dangerous. It's unstable. Uncontrollable. Kale watched her carefully. You've seen it happen. Pain flashed across her features. My siblings. Other prototypes. None survived the transformation with their consciousness intact. Those who witnessed it. She trailed off, then met his eyes directly. They didn't survive at all. The implication hung in the air between them. Kale should walk away. Every instinct honed through years of combat and subsequent survival screamed that Lyra was a danger beyond anything he'd encountered. But something held him there, perhaps the ghost of the man he'd once been, before Omnicorp had turned him into a weapon too. Get some rest, he said finally. We move at station cycle dawn. I know places to hide, at least temporarily. Why help me? Lyra asked, genuine puzzlement in her voice. Kale didn't answer immediately. Images from Epsilon Eridani flooded back. The faces of those he couldn't save, those he hadn't tried to save until it was too late. Because I've spent 6 years running from what I've done, he said at last. Maybe it's time to stand for something instead. The mining tunnels of Cygnus X7 formed a labyrinthine network beneath the moon's surface, many long abandoned after the primary mineral veins had been exhausted. Kale led Lyra through passages that hadn't seen human traffic in decades, relying on his augmented vision and memorized maps to navigate the treacherous terrain. Lyra moved with increasing strength as her body continued its accelerated healing. She required no food or water, Kale noted with fascination and unease. Whatever energy powered her cellular processes, it wasn't derived from standard human metabolism. The corporation has mining operations across 17 systems, Kale explained as they traversed a narrow catwalk above a vast excavation pit. But Cygnus was one of the first. These older facilities were built before standardized designs. Makes them unpredictable, harder to patrol. You know their systems well, Lyra observed. I enforced their will for 8 years, he replied grimly. Learn how they think, how they operate. Until Epsilon Eridani, she said casually. Kale stopped abruptly, turning to face her. How do you know about that? Lyra met his gaze without flinching. Constructs are designed to access information systems. When I escaped, I downloaded everything I could about potential allies. Your defection was notable precisely because it was so rare. I'm no ally, Kale said sharply. I'm just another fugitive. You chose to help me, she countered. That makes you more than you think you are. Before he could respond, a distant rumble echoed through the tunnel. Both froze, listening intently. Mining equipment? Lyra whispered. Kale shook his head, expression grim. This sector's been abandoned for years. Nothing should be operational. He gestured for her to follow, moving with greater urgency. They emerged into a vast processing chamber where massive machinery sat silent and corroded. Catwalks crisscrossed the upper levels, and enormous chemical vats, long emptied but still reeking of industrial solvents, dominated the lower floor. We need to cross to the southern exit, Kale whispered, pointing to a distant doorway. Stay high, avoid the... A blinding light suddenly flooded the chamber, accompanied by the distinctive whine of Omnicorp security drones. Unauthorized personnel detected. Stand down for processing. 6 heavily armed figures entered from various access points. Reclaimers in full tactical gear, their movements fluid despite their cybernetic enhancements. These weren't standard patrol units. Their armor bore the distinctive red stripe of Omnicorp's elite hunter squad. They tracked us, Kale muttered, drawing his pulse pistol while scanning for escape routes. All appear blocked. Lyra's breathing had accelerated, her pupils dilating rapidly. No, they tracked me. The disruptor weapon. It must have contained a tracer. The lead reclaimer stepped forward, his face obscured by a tactical helmet, voice amplified. Construct LY. 78. You are corporate property. Surrender for reclamation. Kale glanced at Lyra, seeing fear and determination war across her features. "Is there another way out?" she whispered. He shook his head slightly. "Not without going through them." "Then we go through them," she said, her voice suddenly different, resonant with a harmonic quality that raised the hair on Cale's neck. Before he could stop her, Lyra vaulted over the railing, dropping 20 feet to the chamber floor. She landed with inhuman grace, the impact that should have shattered human legs absorbed seamlessly by her body. "Lyra, don't!" Cale shouted, but it was too late. The reclaimers immediately opened fire, energy weapons discharging in coordinated volleys. Lyra moved with impossible speed, her form blurring as she evaded most shots. Those that connected seemed to pass through her with minimal effect, as though her molecular structure was temporarily altering to absorb or redirect the energy. Cale swore and began providing covering fire from above, his military-grade pulse pistol barely penetrating the Reclaimer's armor, but creating enough distraction to disrupt their coordinated assault. What happened next burned itself permanently into his memory. Lyra reached the first Reclaimer and made contact with the armor's neural interface port. The soldier convulsed as she established a connection, and suddenly the Reclaimer's own weapon turned on his squad mates, firing with deadly precision before the man collapsed. The remaining Reclaimers adjusted tactics, deploying some kind of dampening field that seemed to cause Lyra physical pain. She staggered, her movements becoming less fluid. Cale didn't hesitate. He swung down from the catwalk using a hanging chain, landing behind 2 Reclaimers and engaging them directly. His combat augmentations might be outdated compared to their cutting-edge enhancements, but experience counted for something. The fight was chaotic, brutal, and brief. Cale managed to neutralize one Reclaimer with a point-blank shot to the helmet's visual sensors, followed by a knife thrust to the exposed neck seal, an old Enforcer trick exploiting a design flaw Omnicorp apparently still hadn't fixed. When he turned to find Lyra, his blood froze. She was surrounded by the remaining Reclaimers, their weapons now emitting some kind of containment field. But it wasn't their technology that stopped him cold. It was Lyra herself. Her form was changing. The smooth contours of her body rippled with subsurface movement, as though something was struggling to emerge. Her eyes blazed with internal light, and the air around her seemed to distort, colors shifting in impossible ways. Transformation sequence detected, one Reclaimer announced clinically. "Prepare for containment protocol Theta." With sudden clarity, Cale understood. They weren't trying to capture Lyra. They were deliberately pushing her toward the transformation she feared, the final form. "Lyra," he shouted, "they're triggering you intentionally. Control it." Her head snapped toward him, eyes now glowing with an inner fire that was beautiful and terrifying. For a moment, recognition flashed across her features, and with visible effort, she seemed to pull herself back from some internal brink. The distraction cost her. A Reclaimer fired some kind of specialized projectile that embedded itself in Lyra's shoulder. She screamed, the sound inhuman, multi-layered, and tore the device free, but whatever it had delivered was already in her system. Cale didn't think, just acted. He overloaded his pulse pistol's power cell, a suicidal tactic they'd been warned against in Enforcer training, and threw it at the clustered Reclaimers. The explosion ripped through the chamber, sending shrapnel in all directions. Cale had already lunged for Lyra, tackling her behind a chemical vat for protection. The blast disoriented the remaining Reclaimers long enough for them to escape through a maintenance hatch Cale spotted in the confusion. They ran blindly through service tunnels, alarms blaring behind them, until they reached an old atmospheric processing plant. Only when they were secured inside a defunct control room did Cale turn to fully examine Lyra. She was huddled against a wall, arms wrapped around herself, trembling violently. The smooth skin of her forearms now displayed faint, geometric patterns that pulsed with subtle light. Her breathing came in ragged gasps. "What do they inject you with?" Cale asked urgently, approaching carefully. "Catalyst," she managed between spasms. "Designed to accelerate transformation. Break down inhibitors." "How do we stop it?" "We don't." Her eyes met his, now ringed with a luminous corona. "I can only contain it. For now." Kale watched helplessly as she fought her internal battle, occasionally convulsing as waves of transformation threatened to overtake her. Gradually, the episodes became less frequent, her breathing steadied, and the geometric patterns faded, though they didn't disappear entirely. "You controlled it," he observed when she finally straightened, exhaustion evident in her posture. "Temporarily." Lyra examined her arms with clinical detachment. "The catalyst remains in my system. They'll perfect the formula next time. Why risk triggering something they can't control?" Lyra's laugh was hollow. "Because they believe they can control it. The final form is their endgame, a weapon of mass destruction they can deploy with precision." Her expression darkened. "They designed a prison for it, a containment facility where they can study the transformation, extract what they need, then neutralize the threat when they're done. All this effort for one weapon?" Kale questioned. "Not just a weapon. A template." Lyra touched the faint patterns on her skin. "If they can capture the final form's genetic structure, they can mass-produce it. Imagine armies of controlled destroyers, each capable of leveling entire settlements." She looked up at him, "Like Epsilon Eridani, but without requiring human soldiers to carry the burden." The implication hit Kale like a physical blow. Omnicorp wasn't just developing a new weapon. They were creating a replacement for human enforcers entirely. No more inconvenient consciences, no more defectors like him. Just perfect, obedient destruction. "We need to move," he said after a moment of contemplation. "There's a research outpost 2 sectors north, abandoned after a containment breach 5 years ago. Might have resources, information." Lyra nodded, pushing herself to her feet with visible effort. "They'll be regrouping, calling in specialized units now that they've confirmed my location." "Then we'd better be somewhere else," Kale replied, already moving toward the exit. The research outpost loomed before them, a stark silhouette against the artificial twilight of Cygnus X7's environmental dome. Unlike the utilitarian mining facilities, this structure bore the sleek, almost predatory aesthetic of Omnicorp's scientific division. All sharp angles and gleaming black surfaces, now dulled by years of neglect. "Vector Biologics Research Station," announced the faded holographic sign above the sealed entrance. Beneath it, barely visible, a hazard warning flickered intermittently. "Containment protocols in effect." "Cheerful," Kale muttered, examining the security panel. Whatever happened here, they locked it down tight. Lyra approached the door, her expression distant. "This facility, it resonates with me somehow." She placed her palm against the security scanner, and immediately the ancient systems sputtered to life, displays flickering as they recognized her biological signature. "Construct prototype recognized. Emergency protocols overridden. Access granted." The massive doors parted with a groan of protesting metal, revealing a darkened interior. Stale air rushed past them, carrying the faint scent of abandonment and something else, something chemical and vaguely organic. "You know this place," Kale stated, watching Lyra's face carefully. "I've never been here," she replied, her brow furrowed. "But memories were implanted in all constructs. Operational data, tactical information." She stepped hesitantly across the threshold. This must have been part of the project. They moved through the facility like ghosts, Kale's augmented vision illuminating their path through laboratories filled with dust-covered equipment, observation rooms with one-way mirrors, and dormitories with small, prison-like cells. "They kept subjects here," Lyra whispered, trailing her fingers along a reinforced door. "Early versions, perhaps. Before me." The central research hub was a vast circular chamber dominated by a supercomputer array and surrounded by workstations. Most displays were dead, but a few emergency systems still functioned on backup power. Lyra immediately went to the main terminal, placing her hand on the interface. Her eyes glazed as she connected directly with the system, data streaming through her neural pathways. Kale stood guard, unnerved by the unnatural stillness that came over her during these connections. Project Ascendant, she said suddenly, her voice oddly flat. 17 years of research. Hundreds of failed prototypes. Images began appearing on the nearby screens. Cellular structures, genetic sequences, failed subjects in various states of grotesque transformation. They were trying to create controllable evolution, she continued, scrolling through data faster than human eyes could process. Organisms that could adapt instantly to any threat, any environment, by transforming their biological structure. Weapons that could breach any defense, Kale translated grimly. More than weapons. Tools of conquest. New images appeared. Simulations of transformed constructs terraforming hostile environments, neutralizing indigenous threats, preparing worlds for omnicorp colonization. They didn't just want soldiers. They wanted vanguards for their expansion. Lyra's connection to the system suddenly intensified, her body going rigid. I'm accessing restricted files. Security countermeasures are, she gasped, her form momentarily flickering with the same disturbing ripple effect Kale had witnessed during the Reclaimer attack. He moved to pull her away from the terminal, but she raised a hand to stop him. No, I need to see this. The screens filled with new data, detailed schematics of Lyra herself, or at least a construct sharing her designation, LY-78. Alongside it, horrifying transformation sequences showing the progression toward what could only be the final form. A being of terrible beauty and power, barely recognizable as humanoid, emanating energies that destroyed everything in its proximity. They knew, Lyra whispered, horror creeping into her voice. They knew the final form couldn't be controlled, that it destroys everything, including its host consciousness eventually. She tore through more files. These are records of deliberate trigger attempts, sacrificing entire research teams to document the transformation process. Why continue if they couldn't control it? Kale asked, studying the disturbing images. Because they found something else. Lyra accessed a heavily encrypted file, the effort visibly straining her. Something they called the Ascension Protocol. A theoretical method to stabilize the final form by, she paused, expression confused, by introducing a psychological anchor, a consciousness-to-consciousness bond with a compatible subject. What does that mean? I don't know. The data is incomplete. The lead researcher, Lyra, stopped abruptly, her connection to the system disrupted by some internal security protocol. She stumbled back from the terminal, catching herself on a nearby workstation. Lyra, we need to leave, she said urgently. Accessing those files triggered an automated signal. They'll know we're here. As if summoned by her words, security systems throughout the facility suddenly activated, emergency lights bathing the chamber in pulsing red. Perimeter breach detected. Reclaimer units responding. Containment protocol activated. They raced through the facility's corridors, Lyra leading with preternatural certainty despite never having physically been there before. The implanted memories, it seemed, included escape routes. They had nearly reached an emergency exit when a blast door slammed down before them, cutting off their path. Simultaneously, the corridor behind them sealed, trapping them in a 20-meter section. Clever, came a voice from hidden speakers, using the facility's own systems against us. But predictable. A holographic projection flickered to life in the center of the corridor. A man in an Omnicorp executive uniform, his face bearing the distinctive scarring of extensive cybernetic integration. Something about him struck Kale as familiar. Commander Vex, Kale realized aloud. The man who had given the order at Epsilon Eridani. His former superior. The projection smiled thinly. Enforcer Kale. The defector becomes the defender. How poetically futile. Lyra stepped forward, her body language suddenly predatory. You're the architect of Project Ascendant, and you're my greatest achievement, LY-78, and greatest disappointment. Vex's holographic form gestured expansively. So much potential wasted on this absurd quest for what? Freedom? Identity? Concepts you were never designed to need. You made us too well, Lyra countered. You gave us consciousness to enhance our infiltration capabilities, then expected us not to use it, a miscalculation being rectified in newer models. Vex's attention shifted to Kale. Though I must thank you, Enforcer. You've accomplished what my reclaimers could not. You've led the prototype exactly where we needed her. Kale's augmented vision detected the subtle change in air composition before his human senses could. An aerosol deployment system had activated, filling the sealed corridor with a fine mist. Lyra, he warned, but already she was reacting, her body convulsing as the chemical catalyst made contact with her skin. The final form requires a significant external stimulus to trigger in resistant subjects, Vex explained clinically. Psychological stress, physical trauma, specialized catalysts, or ideally, all three. You've delivered her to the perfect testing ground. Lyra collapsed to her knees, her form beginning to distort in the same disturbing manner as before, but more pronounced. The geometric patterns on her skin blazed to life, spreading across her entire body like circuitry made of light. You don't understand what you're doing, Kale shouted at the projection, moving to Lyra's side. You can't control this. Control isn't the immediate objective, Enforcer. Documentation is. Vex's smile widened. The facility's systems will record every aspect of the transformation. This chamber is specifically designed to contain the initial phase long enough for complete data collection. And after that, Kale demanded, supporting Lyra as she trembled violently in his arms. After that, the chamber will fail catastrophically, as expected. The final form will expend itself, destroying this abandoned facility, a regrettable but acceptable loss. And we'll have everything we need to perfect the next generation. The hologram flickered, Vex's expression turning serious. Consider your debt to humanity paid, Enforcer. Your failure at Epsilon Eridani will be balanced by your contribution today. The projection vanished, leaving them alone in the rapidly filling chamber. The catalyst mist thickened, its effect on Lyra intensifying visibly. Her skin had begun to take on a translucent quality, the light patterns beneath pulsing in complex, accelerating rhythms. Kale, she gasped, her voice distorted by harmonics that hurt his ears. You need to find a way out. Now. I can't. Hold it back. Much longer. He shook his head, mind racing through options. The blast doors were impenetrable, designed specifically to contain the energies of a transforming construct. The ventilation system that was pumping in the catalyst offered no escape route. There has to be a way, he insisted, scanning the chamber desperately. Something they overlooked. No time, Lyra groaned. The transformation was progressing faster now, her fingers elongating into something resembling claws, her eyes radiating light that cast shadows despite the chamber's illumination. The containment will fail when I transform fully, but by then, understanding dawned on Kale. By then you'll be gone, your consciousness replaced by the weapon. She nodded, a jerking, pain movement, and everything in proximity will be destroyed, including you. Her gaze found his, terror and resignation warring in those increasingly inhuman eyes. No one survives seeing my final form. Kale looked at her, really looked at her, not as a weapon or a construct or a fugitive, but as a being fighting desperately for autonomy against her own programming, fighting to protect him, even as her identity was being stripped away. In that moment, something shifted in him. The weight of Epsilon Eridani, the years of running and hiding, the self-loathing that had defined his existence. It didn't disappear, but it transformed, crystallizing into a single point of absolute clarity. He had failed once before, choosing safety over standing against atrocity. He would not fail again. Kale moved closer, even as Lyra's transformation accelerated, the air around her beginning to warp with released energy. Then I'll die seeing you as you are, he said simply. Her eyes widened in shock. What are you doing? Get back. No. He reached for her hand, now barely recognizable as human, crackling with energy that burned his skin on contact. He didn't flinch away. They said they found a protocol, a consciousness bond that could stabilize the transformation. A psychological anchor. Theoretical, never tested. She gasped, trying to pull away from him, even as the transformation consumed more of her humanity. Then we test it now, Kale said firmly, holding her gaze as her face began to elongate, features shifting into something both beautiful and terrible. I see you, Lyra. Not what they made you to be, what you chose to be. The chamber's reinforced walls began to crack as the energy emanating from Lyra intensified. Warning klaxons blared, automated systems announcing containment failure imminent. But Kale didn't move, didn't look away from the being Lyra was becoming. I forgive myself, he said, the words coming from some place of truth he hadn't known existed within him. And I see you. Something impossible happened. The chaotic energies surrounding Lyra didn't diminish. If anything, they intensified, but they changed. The random destruction, the molecular disintegration affecting the chamber walls, suddenly gained purpose, direction, intent. Lyra's form continued to transform, but instead of the mindless weapon documented in the facility's records, she emerged as something else entirely. Her body elongated, skin transitioning to a crystalline, opalescent surface that refracted light in hypnotic patterns. Wings of pure energy unfurled from her back, and her face, still recognizably Lyra, but heightened, refined, radiated power. But her eyes remained her own, filled with shock, pain, and dawning comprehension. Kale, she spoke, her voice layered with harmonics that somehow no longer hurt to hear. I can feel it, the final form, but I'm still me. The containment chamber was disintegrating around them, the specialized materials unable to withstand even this controlled version of Lyra's transformation. Alarms screamed warning of imminent structural failure. Can you control it? Kale asked urgently. Direct it. Lyra looked at her transformed hands, flexing them experimentally. Energy arced between her fingertips. Yes, I think. Yes. Then get us out of here. With newfound purpose, Lyra turned toward the nearest blast door. She extended one hand, and a focused beam of energy, the same chaotic power that had threatened to consume her, now harnessed, lanced outward, cutting through the reinforced metal like it was paper. They moved through the facility with devastating efficiency, Lyra clearing paths through sealed sections, Kale navigating based on his tactical training. Omnicorp security systems activated to stop them, but nothing could stand against Lyra's control power. They encountered a squadron of reclaimers near the exit, led by Commander Vex himself, no longer a hologram, but present in enhanced flesh. His expression shifted from scientific interest to alarm as he registered what stood before him. Impossible, he breathed. The consciousness should be obliterated in the transformation. You should be pure weapon now. You never understood what you created, Lyra replied, her voice resonating with power. Consciousness isn't a programming subroutine to be overwritten. It's what makes us more than weapons. Vex's surprise transitioned to calculation. Fascinating. A stable transformation. The Ascension Protocol actually worked. He gestured to the reclaimers. Capture them. Non-lethal measures only. This development changes everything. The elite hunters moved with cybernetic precision, deploying specialized containment technology, energy-dampening fields, molecular stabilizers, neural disruptors. Under normal circumstances, they might have overwhelmed even an exceptional target. But Lyra was beyond exceptional now. She moved like living lightning, her transformed body navigating space with impossible grace. Where the reclaimers deployed technology, she countered with raw power precisely controlled. Not killing. Kale noted this with surprise, but disabling, destroying weapons and enhancements rather than the humans wielding them. Kale engaged Vex directly, old training resurfacing as he faced his former commander. The man had enhanced himself significantly since Epsilon Eridani, cybernetic augmentations making him faster, stronger than any normal human. But Kale fought with something Vex couldn't match: absolute clarity of purpose. Every feint, every strike was executed with the certainty of someone who had finally found his path after years of wandering. You failed at Epsilon Eridani because you were weak, Vex snarled as they grappled. You couldn't make the necessary sacrifice. I failed because I believed the lie that atrocity could serve progress, Kale countered, landing a precise blow to an exposed neural junction in Vex enhancements. The commander staggered, systems momentarily disrupted. And now, Vex demanded, recovering quickly. What truth do you serve, defector? Kale glanced at Lyra, who had neutralized the last of the reclaimers and now hovered slightly above the ground, wings of energy illuminating the chamber. Not what, Kale replied, delivering a final, disabling strike to Vex primary system relay. Who? The commander collapsed, his enhanced body twitching with system failures. This isn't over, he managed through gritted teeth. Omnicorp will never stop hunting what belongs to them. We know, Lyra said, moving to Kale's side. But they'll be hunting something they don't understand. And never will. They left the facility together, emerging onto the surface of Cygnus X-7 as alarms continued to blare behind them. The environmental dome above cast artificial moonlight across the barren landscape, ghostly light reflecting off Lyra's transformed body. I can't maintain this form indefinitely, she said as they put distance between themselves and the research outpost. The energy consumption is substantial, but I can control the reversion now. Move between states as needed. You found a third option, Kale observed. Neither weapon nor fugitive. We both did. Her transformed hand found his, the touch warm but no longer burning. The Ascension Protocol wasn't just about stabilizing the final form. It was about connection, finding something worth fighting for beyond survival. In the distance, they could see Omnicorp ships descending toward the facility, reinforcements arriving too late to capture them, but signaling that the hunt would continue. Where now? Kale asked, surveying the horizon. Lyra's wings flared slightly, a compass pointing outward. There are others like me, constructs who escaped, who are hiding. They deserve the chance I've been given. To find their own anchors, their own paths, to be seen as they are, she corrected softly. Even the parts they fear. Kale nodded, understanding completely. The road ahead would be dangerous. Omnicorp's reach extended across systems, and they'd now be hunting two high-value targets. But for the first time since Epsilon Eridani, the weight of the past felt like strength rather than burden. Then we find them, he said simply. Together, Lyra began to shift, her transformed state gradually receding, energy wings folding into her increasingly human form. But something remained, a subtle luminescence beneath her skin, patterns that spoke of her true nature, no longer hidden but integrated. As the first light of the artificial dawn broke across Cygnus X-7, they moved forward, neither fully human nor weapon, but something new, something chosen rather than programmed, something free.